Delegates from nearly 200 countries are meeting to negotiate the world's next steps in the fight against climate change. Anne-Marie's here to explain why so much attention is given to these yearly climate conferences. It is kind of interesting that we pay a lot of attention to it, even though it feels like nothing ever gets done.
Well, that's the question now. Are we making any progress? And we are. So the annual Conference of the Parties, also known as COP, is an international climate meeting held each year by the United Nations. And one of the most famous ones, if I can get my touch screen, there you go. One of the most famous agreements made during the meetings is the 1997 Kyoto Protocol. I know you've heard of that. It established a system where the UN can legally hold nations accountable for global emission reductions by issuing fines and other penalties for violations. In 2015, 194 countries and the European Union adopted the Paris Agreement, a legally binding international treaty replacing Kyoto. That agreement aims to build off the work of Kyoto by reducing greenhouse gases. It also requires nations to keep global temperature increases well below 2 degrees Celsius, which is the point the scientists say there will be catastrophic damage to the planet. Last year's conference in Egypt established the first ever loss and damage fund. Wealthier nations agreed to create a fund to compensate poorer countries that are victims of climate disasters caused by excessive pollution. And this year, the world's nations have to work out how that program will actually work and how it'll be funded. COP28 will also include the first ever global stock take as dictated by the Paris Agreement. Delegates will discuss how much progress has been made to reduce the global temperature increase. Right now, the world is not on track, though, to meet its goals, and temperatures will rise by at least 2.4 degrees Celsius. That's according to the UN. So it's up to each nation to assess just how it can reform its policies to meet those goals, Vlad.
All right, Anne-Marie, thank you very much. CBS News will bring you the latest updates on the global stock take and other climate negotiations throughout the conference. And this year is set to be the hottest year ever recorded on Earth. It's also a year when the United States broke records in oil and gas production, thanks in part to the Biden administration's policies. As senior national and environmental correspondent Ben Tracy shows us, the president's climate response is complicated at best.
In Colorado Wednesday, President Biden visited the largest manufacturer of wind towers in the world.
What's your name? Eddie, I'm Joe. Good to see you.
Touting record levels of federal funding for clean energy projects across the country.
Building a clean energy future made in America.
But he didn't mention that the U.S. is also producing record amounts of crude oil. Planet-warming emissions from fossil fuels are the main driver of climate change. 2023 is expected to be the planet's hottest year on record.
Drill, baby, drill.
Compared to former President Trump, Mr. Biden actually approved more permits for oil and gas drilling on public lands in his first 2 years in office. And the U.S. is now the largest oil and gas producer in the world.
We can't be building new fossil fuel infrastructure.
Michael Mann is a climate scientist and author of Our Fragile Moment.
We will see emissions come to a peak this year. They will no longer climb as they have in the past. The bad news is reaching a plateau isn't good enough. Those emissions have to come down to zero, and they have to do that pretty quickly.
And so those emissions are not going to go down like that if we continue to burn fossil fuels.
That's right. We need to literally bring carbon emissions down to zero in a matter of decades.
Phasing out fossil fuels is a heated debate at the UN Climate Summit in Dubai. Many climate activists fear the process has been compromised by being held in the oil-rich UAE and presided over by the head of its state-owned oil company.
It looks bad, it smells bad, and it's probably bad.
But he hopes world leaders will rise to the occasion and cut planet-warming emissions before it's too late. I'm Ben Tracy in Los Angeles.